The scream cut through the marble lobby like breaking glass. Sarah Blake's back hit the wall near the VIP lounge, her briefcase clattering to the floor. Two security guards, ex-military, build the kind
You think
who
you can
moved
just
like
take
they'd
her?
seen
Back
real
off! She's not
combat
yours!
block
Stop
their
it,
exit,
both of you!
with the practiced
This isn't
efficiency
over.
of men who knew exactly how much pressure to apply before something broke. Mr. Hartford doesn't like people asking questions about employee records. The taller guard name tag reading Garrett had a Texas drawl that made the threat sound almost friendly. Sarah's hands came up trembling. "I'm a state investigator. You should have thought about that before snooping." Trent, the second guard, stepped closer. His shoulder filled her field of vision. Wealthy guests glided past in the lobby of the Sterling Grand Hotel, their eyes sliding away with the practiced ease of people who'd spent lifetimes pretending not to see things beneath their notice. A woman in a cream Chanel suit paused mid-stride champagne flute halfway to her lips, then continued toward the elevators without breaking stride. The piano player in the corner never missed a note. Near the concierge desk, a small girl sat on a leather bench clutching a yellow paper crane. 8 years old, maybe. She watched the scene unfold with wide eyes, her fingers tightening around the folded paper until it crumpled slightly at the edges. "Step away from her." The voice came from behind the guards, quiet, but it carried, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to command attention. Both men turned. A man in his mid-30s walked toward them across the polished marble. Worn Carhartt jacket over a faded flannel shirt, jeans with honest dirt on the knees, Red Wing work boots that had seen a few too many Chicago winters. He moved with an economy of motion that suggested he knew exactly where his body was in space at all times. Trent laughed, genuinely amused. "You're joking. What are you gonna do, bleed on us?" The man stopped 10 feet away. His eyes were the color of Lake Michigan in November. Cold, patient, assessing. Freeze frame. The lobby crystallized into a single moment. Chandeliers throwing expensive light guards with their hands moving toward their belts. The woman pressed against the wall. The small girl on the bench watching her father walk toward violence with the kind of calm that came from having done it 1,000 times before. The wrong man. Let me tell you how we got here. 6 hours earlier, the Morrison kitchen smelled like burnt pancakes and regret. Jake Morrison stood at the stove in his Oak Park bungalow, scraping blackened batter off cast iron, while his daughter folded origami at the kitchen table. Autumn sunlight filtered through curtains his wife had picked out 7 years ago, back when the house still felt too big for 3 people, instead of too small for 2. "Is today the big meeting?" Lily's fingers worked the yellow paper with the kind of precision most 8-year-olds reserved for video games. "Just paperwork. 15 minutes tops." Jake slid a less burnt pancake onto her plate. "Contract for the HVAC work at that hotel downtown. The fancy one on Michigan Avenue." "That's the one." She held up the crane, examining it against the light. "This one's special. It's my lucky one." Her voice carried the absolute certainty of childhood. "It's a promise everything will be okay." Jake ruffled her hair, feeling the weight of promises he'd made and kept and broken over the years. "Then we'll keep it safe. Nothing's going to happen to your crane." He turned back to the stove, his hands moving through the familiar motions. Scarred hands. The kind of scars that came from fire and blades, and the particular brand of violence that happened in places the State Department preferred not to discuss. Burn marks on his left palm from an IED outside Kandahar. 3 thin white lines across his right knuckles where a knife had opened him to the bone in a compound whose name he still couldn't speak. Lily didn't notice the scars anymore. She'd grown up with them the way other kids grew up with their father's tattoos or crooked smiles, just part of the landscape of who he was. On the counter, visible to anyone who looked but invisible to the girl who'd never known her mother's voice, sat a photograph. Diane Morrison at Navy Pier, laughing at something the photographer said, holding a bundle of pink blanket that would become Lily 2 weeks later. The photo had been on that counter for 6 years, ever since the funeral at St. Ferdinand Church. Ever since Jake had come home from a deployment he couldn't name to find his daughter screaming in the arms of strangers and his world reduced to a folded flag. "Dad," Lily's voice pulled him back. "You're burning another one." He flipped the pancake. Salvageable. Barely. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that came from being each other's entire world for so long that words became optional. Through the window, Jake could see his truck in the driveway, a 2009 Ford F-150, with 180,000 miles, a cracked windshield, and Illinois plates held on with wire after the screws had rusted through. It had been Diane's truck first. Now it was his. Everything was his now. "You checked the locks twice this morning." Lily wasn't asking. "Just being careful, sweetheart. Always good to be prepared." Prepared for what? He looked at her, then really looked. She had Diane's eyes, her mother's way of seeing through the things people said to the things they meant. At 8 years old, she already understood more about reading people than most adults learned in a lifetime. Nothing specific, just a habit from the army. She nodded, satisfied enough with that answer to return to her crane. He watched her fold, remembering the counselor at the VA who'd told him that hypervigilance was a symptom that checking locks and watching exit routes and sleeping 3 hours a night were things that could be fixed with time and therapy. That had been 4 years ago. He still checked the locks twice, still slept 3 hours, still cataloged exits and threats and potential vectors of attack every time he entered a room. Some things didn't fix. They just became part of the routine. By 1:30, they were in the truck heading east on the Eisenhower Expressway toward downtown Chicago. WGN News AM 720 played through speakers held together with duct tape. Talk of inflation, city council corruption, a water main break on the south side. The familiar litany of a city that had been broken and patched and broken again so many times nobody remembered what whole looked like anymore. Lily hummed along to a commercial jingle, her crane resting on her lap like a talisman. Jake kept his eyes on the road and his hands at 10 and 2, and tried not to think about the fact that every instinct he'd honed over 6 deployments was currently screaming at him to turn the truck around and go home. The Sterling Grand Hotel rose from Michigan Avenue like a monument to the kind of wealth that didn't just buy things. It bought silence. Marble and crystal and the particular species of hushed reverence that money commanded from people who'd learned early that deference was the price of employment. Jake held the door for Lily, and they stepped into air conditioning that cost more per month than his mortgage. The lobby was designed to make you feel small. Vaulted ceilings, chandeliers that probably had names, leather furniture arranged in intimate clusters where men in suits that cost more than Jake's truck conducted business in voices that never rose above a murmur. Wealth whispered here. It didn't need to shout. "Wow." Lily's voice was appropriately awed. "Remember what we talked about?" She nodded. "We belong anywhere we have business being." "That's right." But the concierge approaching them clearly disagreed. Marcus' name tag in tasteful gold script had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. 20-something. Probably made more in tips from a single guest than Jake made in a week fixing furnaces. "I'm sorry, our VIP lounge is members only. I have a 2 p.m. with Mr. Hughes." Jake kept his voice even, Midwest polite. "HVAC contract meeting. Jake Morrison." Marcus's eyes did the math work. Boots plus flannel plus little girl plus no reservation equaled a mistake, probably. He tapped his iPad with theatrical reluctance. "Please wait here. I'll notify Mr. Hughes." He walked 3 steps away and made a phone call, his voice low, but his eyes never leaving them. Jake had seen that look before. Not just in hotels, but in restaurants and stores and every space where the cost of admission was counted in credit card tiers instead of character. Lily's hand found his. Why is he staring? Some people aren't used to seeing folks like us in places like this. Jake squeezed her fingers. That's their problem, not ours. But it was becoming their problem. He could feel the shift in the room's attention, the way conversations paused as they passed the sideways glances from guests who'd perfected the art of looking without being seen to look. Lily pulled her hand free to adjust her grip on the crane. It slipped from her fingers, rolled across the marble floor in a lazy arc that ended at the feet of a woman in cream Chanel and a Hermes bag that probably cost more than Jake's truck and house combined. Victoria Ashford, he'd learn her name later from the hotel's incident report, never looked down. Her Manolo Blahnik heel came down directly on the crane as she glided toward the elevators, crushing yellow paper into the floor with the same thoughtless ease she'd have given to a leaf or a receipt. Lily made a small sound, not quite a cry but close, and dropped to her knees. Near the bar, 2 security guards watched, Garrett and Trent. Jake clocked them immediately, the way they stood, the way their eyes tracked movement, the particular brand of hyper-alert that came from actual training, not just the weekend courses most hotel security sat through. Ex-military. Maybe good, maybe just good enough to be dangerous. Probably trying to steal something. Garrett's voice carried just enough to be heard. Should check their pockets before they leave. Trent laughed. My thoughts exactly. Jake's jaw tightened. His hand clenched into a fist for half a second before he forced it open again. Lily was kneeling on imported Italian marble, trying to smooth bent paper wings, and 2 men who should have been protecting people were making her into a punchline. He knelt beside her. Some people aren't used to seeing folks like us in places like this. It's ruined. Her voice was small. We'll fix it. He helped her to her feet, guided her to a leather bench near the concierge desk. We can fix anything if we're patient enough. She looked at him with those eyes that saw too much. Promise? Promise. He meant it. He'd spent 6 years fixing things for his daughter, fixing breakfast, and fixing scraped knees, and fixing the particular kind of broken that came from growing up without a mother. This was just one more thing on a list that never seemed to get shorter. Brian Hughes appeared with the frantic energy of a man who'd been interrupted during something more important. Hotel general manager. 40-something. Expensive suit worn with the carelessness of someone who had a dozen more in his closet. He thrust a folder at Jake without making eye contact. Sign here, and initial there. Jake read. Every word. The guards at the bar watched him with unconcealed amusement, probably thought he was slow, that reading a contract was some kind of working-class affectation. 6 months of HVAC maintenance, $85,000, standard terms. Fair enough if you didn't count the part where they'd kept him waiting. 40 minutes, and crushed his daughter's crane and made her feel like she didn't belong in a city she'd been born in. He signed. Hughes snatched the papers back like Jake might change his mind. We'll be in touch about the start date. Then he was gone, swallowed by the elevator bank, without a backward glance. Jake turned to collect Lily. The scream cut through every conversation in the lobby. His head snapped toward the sound. Training took over before thought did threat assessment, distance calculation at exit routes. Near the VIP lounge entrance, a woman in a dark business suit was being backed against the wall by 2 security guards. Not Garrett and Trent from earlier, but 2 bigger men. The kind who got hired when looking intimidating was more important than knowing how to de-escalate. The woman's face was pale. Her hands came up in the universal gesture of surrender that never actually stopped anything. Mr. Hartford doesn't like people asking questions about employee records. The lobby froze. Guests stood with champagne halfway to their lips. The concierge suddenly found his iPad fascinating. Even the piano player seemed to soften his playing, as if violence was just another form of ambiance in a 5-star hotel. I'm a state investigator. You should have thought about that before snooping. Jake looked at Lily on the bench, then at the woman against the wall, then back at his daughter. Every decision in life came down to this, he'd learned. Not the big moments you saw coming, but the small ones that appeared without warning and demanded you choose who you were going to be right now. In this second, with no time to think through consequences. Stay here on this bench. He kept his voice steady. Don't move. I'll be right back. What are you doing? Just stay here. He walked toward the VIP lounge. Measured steps, hands visible. No sudden movements that might trigger something nobody could take back. He'd walked toward violence before, across compounds in Kandahar, through alleys in Baghdad, into rooms where people with guns and bad intentions waited in the dark. This was a hotel lobby in downtown Chicago on a Thursday afternoon, but his body didn't know the difference. His pulse stayed steady. His breathing never changed. Muscle memory, older than conscious thought. The guards noticed him when he was 10 feet away. They turned with the synchronized alertness of men who'd worked together long enough to move as a unit. This doesn't concern you. Garrett's hand moved toward his belt. Step away from her. Trent laughed, genuinely amused. You're joking. What are you gonna do? Bleed on us. Jake stopped, 10 feet, close enough to act if he needed to, far enough that they didn't feel immediately threatened. He could read it in their body language, the way Garrett's weight shifted to the balls of his feet, the way Trent's hand hovered near his expandable baton. They were deciding whether he was serious or stupid. He was both. Last chance. Jake's voice stayed quiet. Step away from the woman. You're making a mistake. Garrett's Texas drawl turned cold. Hartford owns half this hotel. He's connected to the mayor, the police commissioner. You don't know who you're... Jake rolled up his right sleeve. The scars came first. Burns that had never healed right. Knife wounds stitched together by field medics in forward operating bases that didn't appear on any map. The particular geography of violence that marked men who'd served in places the news didn't cover. But it was the tattoo that made Garrett's face drain of color. A black dagger point down. Wings spread below. 5 words in Latin that most people wouldn't recognize: de oppresso liber. To free the oppressed. U.S. Army Special Forces. And not just any unit, the specific design marked him as having served with the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. Delta Force. The kind of soldier they didn't talk about on the news. The kind who operated in shadows and came home with scars nobody asked about. Oh shit, Trent breathed. Step away from her, Jake repeated. Last time I'm asking. Garrett's grip tightened on his baton. You think that ink scares me. You think... He swung. Jake moved. Not fast speed implied panic. He moved with the kind of economy that came from training so deep it had erased thought from the equation. His left hand deflected the baton's arc, while his right caught Garrett's wrist, twisting with precise pressure that sent the weapon clattering across marble. A step in. A pivot. Suddenly, Garrett was on his knees, his arm locked behind him in a hold that would break bone if Jake applied another pound of pressure. Trent reached for his belt. Don't. Jake didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Garrett's arm on the angle that separated control from injury. You pull that weapon, I assume lethal intent. You don't want that. Trent froze. The lobby was utterly silent. Even the piano player had stopped. Jake's hands were shaking. Not much barely visible, but he felt it. Adrenaline, memory, the ghost of 1,000 movements, just like this one, performed in places where hesitation meant death. His fingers trembled against Garrett's wrist, and for half a second he was back in a compound outside Kandahar, holding an enemy combatant in exactly this position. Feeling the same awful power of having another human being completely at his mercy. He clenched his fist, forced the tremor to stop before Lily could see. You're making a mistake, Garrett gasped. Hartford will destroy you for this. He's bribing security to threaten women. Jake's voice stayed flat, Midwest monotone. Enlighten me why that matters. Movement in his peripheral vision. He looked up to see Brian Hughes approaching with 4 more guards, professional ones this time. Ex-cops probably, the kind who knew how to write reports that would hold up in court. Mr. Morrison, Hughes's voice carried across the lobby. I need you to come with me. We have witnesses saying you assaulted our staff. Jake released Garrett, stepped back. The guard scrambled to his feet, face red with humiliation and rage. From the bench 30 feet away, Lily watched, clutching the crushed crane. Her father's jacket had ridden up enough to show the rest of the tattoo, the scars, the physical evidence of a past he'd never fully explained to her. Sarah Blake pulled out her phone. I've been recording this entire conversation. She played it back, audio of Hughes threatening Jake, of the guards backing her against the wall, of every word spoken in the last 5 minutes. Her voice turned to steel, the professional mask dropping, to reveal something harder underneath. I'm 3 seconds from sending this to every media outlet in Chicago. Your security assaulted a state investigator. Mr. Morrison intervened. Do you really want this on the news? Hughes calculated. Jake could see it happening, weighing risks, considering consequences, running the math on lawsuits and bad press, and whatever shadow agreements kept men like Hartford comfortable. Get out. Hughes's voice went flat. All of you. If you ever set foot in this hotel again, we're leaving. Jake guided Lily toward the exit. Sarah followed her heels, clicking against marble that had probably been imported from Italy at astronomical expense. The parking garage smelled like concrete and exhaust. Sound echoed strangely their footsteps, a car alarm 3 levels down, the distant rumble of the L train. Sarah handed Jake a business card. Illinois Department of Labor. Official seal. Phone number with a 312 area code. If there's trouble, call me. You did a good thing. Maybe. He didn't believe it. Good things didn't leave your hands shaking and your daughter staring at you like she'd just seen a stranger wearing her father's face. Men like Hartford have expensive lawyers and city officials in their pockets. Sarah's voice was gentle now, kind. But maybe this video will help. Jake helped Lily into the truck. Graco booster seat, buckles that had to be checked twice because that's what fathers did. She clutched the crushed crane like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to a world that made sense. He started the engine. The radio came on mid-commercial, something about a furniture sale in Schaumburg. As he pulled out of the parking garage, he saw Sarah in his rearview mirror, her phone raised. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before she pressed something. Upload. Send. Share. The video that would change everything. They drove home in silence, past the water tower, up Michigan Avenue, through neighborhoods that shifted from wealthy to working in the space of a few blocks. Chicago was like that, segregated not just by race but by money, by history, by the kind of generational wealth that built walls you couldn't see, but absolutely could not cross. Dad, Lily's voice was small. Are you in trouble? No, sweetheart. But that man said, that man was trying to scare me. It didn't work. In the back seat, she went quiet. He watched her in the rearview mirror, trying to smooth the crane's bent wings with fingers too small to really fix it. It's really messed up, she said finally. We'll fix it when we get home. What if we can't? Then you'll make a new one. You're good at that. At home, he made dinner. Chicken and rice and green beans. The kind of simple food he'd learned to cook in the year after Diane died, when feeding his daughter became the only thing that made sense in a world that had stopped making sense entirely. Lily sat at the kitchen table trying to repair the crane with Scotch tape, while he moved through familiar motions, chopping, stirring, checking temperatures. His phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Different number. Ignored. By the 3rd time he picked it up, saw the missed calls and messages piling up, and turned it off completely. "Who keeps calling?" Lily looked up from her repair work. "Nobody important." But that wasn't true. He knew what this was. He'd seen it before the moment something went from private to public, when your face became news and your choices became everyone's opinion. 6 hours. That's all it had taken for Sarah's video to spread from her phone to the internet, to the kind of velocity that turned regular people into stories. By bedtime, Lily's crane was taped together, but clearly damaged. One wing bent at an angle that would never straighten. The yellow paper creased in ways that couldn't be undone. "It's not the same," she said, holding it up to the light. "No." Jake sat on the edge of her bed, the ritual as familiar as breathing. 2 quilts, Build-A-Bear stuffed animal, Disney princess cup of water on the nightstand. But it's still good. Now it has a story. What story? The story of how it got broken and how you fixed it. That's worth more than perfect paper. On her dresser, visible in the glow of her frozen nightlight, sat a photograph. Diane Morrison at Navy Pier, laughing, holding baby Lily. Jake's eyes found it without meaning to the way they always did. 6 years. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. Sometimes it felt like another lifetime entirely. "Would you do it again?" Lily's voice was drowsy. "At the hotel, even though it made things complicated." He looked at the crane, at his daughter, at the photo of his wife who'd never get to see the woman Lily would become. "Every single time." She smiled and rolled over, already half asleep. Jake stood in the doorway, watching her breathe. In and out. The most important sound in the world. He'd crossed half the planet to protect strangers, had put himself between violence and victims more times than he could count. But everything he'd ever done in his life came down to this: making sure she was safe, that she could sleep without fear, that she'd grow up knowing her father was someone who did the right thing, even when it cost him something. He closed her door, leaned against the hallway wall, and felt the weight of the day finally catch up to him. His phone sat on the kitchen counter where he'd left it. He turned it on. The screen lit up with notifications: 47 missed calls, 124 text messages. He scrolled through them with growing unease. Channel 7 News. "We'd love to discuss yesterday's incident." Chicago Tribune. "Can we schedule an interview?" Unknown. "You made a mistake." And then at the bottom, buried under requests and warnings, and the particular species of attention he'd spent 5 years trying to avoid: "We need to talk. Sarah Blake." Jake stared at the message. Outside, Oak Park was settling into its usual Thursday night rhythms. Porch lights coming on garage doors, closing, the distant sound of the Blue Line train heading back downtown. Normal. Quiet. The kind of life he'd built for Lily, one day at a time. He looked down the hall toward her closed door. Thought about the crane on her dresser. About the photo of Diane that watched over her while she slept. About the promises he'd made to women who were gone, and the one small person who remained. His finger hovered over Sarah's message. Then he typed, "What time?" The response came immediately. 10 a.m. My office. 100 South Wacker Drive. Jake set the phone down, walked to his bedroom, opened the closet and pushed aside work shirts and the sport coat he wore to parent-teacher conferences. In the back, bolted to the floor behind winter coats Lily had outgrown, sat the gun safe. He hadn't opened it in 5 years, not since the day he'd locked his service weapon inside and promised himself that part of his life was over. His hands moved through the combination automatically. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, a Sig Sauer P226, 2 spare magazines, a K-bar knife, and beneath it all a folder containing papers marked with classification levels that should have been redacted before they gave them to him. Jake stared at the contents, at the physical evidence of who he'd been for Lily, before Oak Park, before he'd traded combat boots for Red Wings and learned that fixing furnaces was harder in some ways than the work he'd done overseas. He closed the safe without taking anything out. Not yet. But the fact that he'd opened it at all told him everything he needed to know about how bad this was going to get. Morning came too early. Jake woke at 5 a.m. to find Lily already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of Cheerios, the television on low volume. His face filled the screen. Breaking: former military operator intervenes in hotel altercation. The video was grainy shot from across the lobby on someone's phone, but it showed everything. The guards cornering Sarah. His approach. The moment he'd rolled up his sleeve. The camera had zoomed in on his tattoo, frozen. The image added a helpful graphic explaining what it meant. Delta Force, U.S. Army Special Operations Command. One of the most elite units in American military classified missions worldwide. The news anchor's voice carried that particular tone of manufactured concern that passed for journalism. Sources say Morrison served multiple deployments in classified operations before leaving the military in 2019. The hotel has declined to comment, but questions are being raised about whether Jake grabbed the remote and turned it off. Lily's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. "Dad, eat your breakfast. But they said you were in the army." Lily. His voice came out sharper than he'd intended. She flinched and something in his chest cracked. He sat down beside her, forced his tone softer. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to snap. Yes, that was me on TV. It's complicated. We'll talk about it later." Okay. But she was looking at him differently now. Not with fear. Lily had never been afraid of him, even when maybe she should have been. But with something else. Recognition, perhaps. Of the fact that her father contained multitudes she'd never suspected, that the man who made her breakfast and checked her homework and tucked her in at night was also someone who could disarm a trained security guard in 2 seconds without breaking a sweat. At the bus stop on Ridgeland Avenue, 3 neighbors who usually just waved crossed the street to talk. Mrs. Kowalski with her small dog, Mr. Hernandez with his coffee thermos, Jessica Walker in her Northwestern hoodie. "Saw you on the news, Jake." Mrs. Kowalski's voice carried the particular reverence Midwestern people reserved for anyone who'd done something notable. That was quite something. "Took guts, brother." Mr. Hernandez extended his hand. They shook. Other parents were staring, whispering. Lily pressed closer to his side. The yellow CPS bus pulled up number 3847, the same bus that picked her up every morning, driven by the same driver who'd been waving at her for 3 years. Normal. Routine. Except nothing was routine anymore. Lily climbed aboard, found her usual seat, pressed her hand against the window. Small wave. Jake waved back, kept his face calm and composed until the bus pulled away. Then his hand started trembling. He shoved it in his pocket, walked back to his house past neighbors who were suddenly very interested in their phones or their lawns or anything except making eye contact with the man who'd become a story overnight. Inside, his phone buzzed. Unknown number with a 312 area code. He answered. "Mr. Morrison, this is Rebecca Mitchell with the Chicago Tribune. I'm writing a story about yesterday's incident at the Sterling Grand. I'd love to get your side before it publishes this evening." "I don't have a side. I helped someone, that's all. The hotel is saying you assaulted their staff without provocation. They're suggesting you may be suffering from PTSD or other service-related..." He hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. He let it go to voicemail. It rang again. And again, and again. By noon, he'd received 47 calls, 89 text messages, and had learned that privacy was something you only appreciated after you'd lost it. The elevator to the 23rd floor of 100 South Wacker Drive smelled like expensive coffee and desperation. Jake stood with his back to the mirrored wall, watching the numbers climb, refusing to look at his own reflection. He knew what he'd see: a man in work boots and a jacket that had seen better winters about to walk into a law firm where the receptionist's shoes probably cost more than his monthly mortgage. Sarah Blake met him at the elevator bank. "Thanks for coming. Let's walk and talk." They moved through hallways lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Chicago River. Other attorneys passed in Brooks Brothers armor, their eyes sliding over Jake the way water slides off glass. Through conference room doors, he caught glimpses of depositions and negotiations, the bloodless violence of people who fought with billable hours instead of fists. "Coffee," Sarah gestured toward a break room. "I'm fine." A man joined them mid-stride. Michael Brennan, Sarah had said on the phone, Irish-American 40-something with a Boston accent that cut through the Midwest flatness of every other voice in the building. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and assessing. "The hotel released a statement this morning." He pulled out his iPhone, handed it to Jake without breaking stride. "You'll want to see this," Jake read while they walked. The words had that particular species of corporate smoothness that managed to say everything and nothing at once. The Sterling Grand Hotel takes the safety of all guests and staff seriously. Yesterday's incident involved an individual who became aggressive and violent without provocation. While we understand Mr. Morrison's military background may have contributed to his response, we cannot condone vigilante behavior. We are cooperating fully with the Chicago Police Department to investigate this matter. "Vigilante behavior," Jake handed the phone back. "They also have security footage." Michael poured coffee from a pot that probably got refilled every hour. "Chicago Bears mug." He handed it to Jake like an offering. "Edited. Shows you grabbing the guard, but not what led up to it." Sarah set her MacBook on the counter. "My video starts 30 seconds after they cornered me. There's a gap. Enough of a gap for reasonable doubt." Michael leaned against the counter, his Boston accent getting thicker. "By tonight, Tribune op-eds will ask if we're doing enough for troubled veterans. Next week, legislation. You'll be the face of a debate you never asked for." Jake's hands tightened around the mug, hot enough to burn. He didn't let go. "So what do you suggest?" "Get ahead of it." Sarah closed the laptop. "I've arranged a meeting with Rebecca Mitchell, Chicago Tribune investigative reporter. She's fair. She'll give you a real hearing. And if I say no, then Hartford Hospitality's version becomes the truth." Michael's voice went flat. "Rich guy gets attacked by unstable vet. It's a story people want to believe because it confirms everything they already think about men like you. That you're dangerous, that you can't control yourselves, that bringing you home was a mistake we're all paying for." The coffee tasted like ash. "When's the meeting?" "She's in the conference room now, Onamtata." Rebecca Mitchell was younger than he'd expected, early 30s maybe. Northwestern journalism degree visible in the way she'd arranged her materials. Digital recorder. Notepad, backup phone recording as insurance. She stood when they entered, extended her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to talk, Mr. Morrison." "Jake." "Jake." She smiled. Real, not the corporate version they'd been passing around this building all morning. "Can I get you anything? Water?" "I'm fine." They sat. The conference room had the same view as the hallway's Chicago River Willis Tower in the distance, boats cutting white lines through gray water. Rebecca poured Dasani into glasses anyway, slid one across the table. "I'm going to record this. For accuracy, not for publication without your approval. If there's anything you don't want on the record, say so. We'll work around it." Jake nodded. The recorder's red light came on. "Walk me through yesterday. Start with why you were at the hotel." So he told her. Contract meeting. 15 minutes of paperwork. His daughter waiting on a bench. The guards. Sarah Blake pressed against a wall while everyone pretended not to see. Rebecca took notes, her hand moving across the page in the particular shorthand journalists developed. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask leading questions, just listened with the kind of attention that made words want to spill out. You recognized something in how those guards moved. What intent? Jake chose his words carefully. Training. They weren't just doing their job. They were professionals told to intimidate someone, and they were good at it. Because of your background, military. It wasn't a question. She'd already done her research, already knew the answer. She was giving him space to tell it in his own words. Yes. Can you talk about your service? The question hit harder than he'd expected. 5 years he'd spent not talking about it. 5 years of letting people assume, letting them fill in the blanks with whatever story made them comfortable. Jake, the HVAC guy. Jake, the single dad. Jake, who'd been in the army once but wasn't anymore. He looked at Sarah. She nodded. I enlisted at Fort Benning, Georgia in 2009. Special Forces selection. Most of my 20s overseas doing things I can't discuss. 4 official deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. More that weren't official. But you left. Why? They stood then, Rebecca still asking questions as they walked back toward the elevators. Michael followed at a respectful distance, close enough to intervene if the interview went somewhere Jake couldn't follow. Why walk away from that career? Rebecca stopped at the elevator, turned to face him directly. From what I've read, you were up for promotion to Master Sergeant. The elevator arrived. Doors opened. Empty. Rebecca held it with her hand waiting. My wife Diane died when my daughter was 2. The words came out flat. Practiced. He'd said them so many times they'd stopped meaning anything except as an explanation for the space where a person used to be. Car accident on the Eisenhower Expressway. I was deployed. Somewhere I can't talk about. Didn't even know for 3 days because we had no comms. His voice caught. He cleared his throat, forced it steady. By the time I got home for the funeral, Lily didn't recognize me. I had a choice: be the father she needed or keep being a ghost who showed up twice a year. So I chose her. Took my discharge. Became an HVAC guy. Rebecca let the elevator door close. Pressed the button again. When it arrived, she stepped inside but didn't press a floor. Off the record now. She turned off the recorder with a deliberate click. Why did you really step in yesterday? You could have walked away. Jake thought about Lily on the bench. The crushed crane. The way the lobby had frozen while everyone pretended not to see a woman being threatened. Because someone had to. And I was there. Rebecca smiled. That's my headline. His truck smelled like old coffee and the particular species of regret that came from knowing you'd just set something in motion you couldn't stop. Jake drove west on I-290. Lily quiet in the back seat, watching the city slide past through windows that needed washing. His phone rang. Sarah's number on the Bluetooth display. Jake. Her voice carried an edge he hadn't heard before. The hotel just fired 18 workers, effective immediately. His hands tightened on the wheel. When, an hour ago, every single person who either spoke to Department of Labor investigators or was mentioned in Rebecca's article. That's illegal. It's blatant retaliation under Illinois Whistleblower Act. But proving it takes time. Right now, these people have rent in Chicago, families to feed. Most can't afford to miss 2 weeks of pay. Lily was watching him in the rearview mirror, reading his face the way she always did, understanding more than an 8-year-old should have to understand about how the world worked. What do they need? Practically right now. Money. Breathing room while we fight for reinstatement. I'll figure something out. He hung up. The silence in the truck felt heavier than before. Dad. Lily's voice was small. Are people losing their jobs because of what you did? He wanted to lie. Wanted to tell her it was complicated, that adults made choices and faced consequences, that this wasn't his fault. But Diane had made him promise no lies, even the comfortable ones. Especially the comfortable ones. Yeah, sweetheart. They are. That's not fair. No, it's not. They drove the rest of the way home without speaking. The Oak Park Public Library still smelled like books and possibility. Jake sat at a corner computer terminal in the public area, Lily beside him with her homework, while he fumbled through creating accounts on platforms he'd spent 5 years successfully avoiding. Twitter. First try username taken. Second try password requirements he hadn't anticipated. Third try success, sort of. Jake Morrison, Oak Park, looked back at him from the screen with 0 followers and the particular emptiness of a life about to go public. GoFundMe was worse. Terms of service, tax implications, questions about whether this counted as charity or personal funding or some third category he didn't understand. He drafted the appeal on notebook paper, first crossed out words, rewrote, crossed out again. Lily looked up from her math worksheet. "What are you doing?" "Trying to help some people who lost their jobs." "Because of the hotel thing." "Yeah." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you should publish it." He typed the final version into the description box. Read it back to himself. It sounded desperate, naive, like something a person who didn't understand how the world worked might write. He clicked publish anyway. Support for Sterling Grand Hotel Workers, Chicago. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm a single father and HVAC contractor from Oak Park, Illinois. I didn't intervene at the Sterling Grand Hotel to become famous or start a movement. I saw something wrong and tried to make it right. Now, 18 workers have lost their jobs for telling the truth about wage theft and abuse. They have families. They have rent to pay in Chicago neighborhoods where wages haven't kept up with cost of living. They have lives that can't wait for the legal system to catch up with justice. Every dollar raised goes directly to them through the Chicago Workers Alliance. No administrative fees, no conditions. If you've reached out asking how you could help, this is how. We don't need heroes. We need people willing to stand together when others try to stand alone. The screen showed $0 raised of $25,000 goal. 0 donors. Lily touched his arm. "Do you think it'll work?" "I don't know, sweetheart, but we tried. That's what matters." He closed the browser, packed up the laptop, took her hand and walked out into October afternoon sun that felt too bright for the weight pressing against his chest. 8 hours later, Jake opened his laptop to check one more time before bed. $43, $267 raised. 847 donors. The number climbed while he watched. $43, $502, $43, $891, $44, $206. He scrolled through the comments, his hands beginning to shake again. $5. This is my lunch money for the week from Duncan, but those workers need it more. Maria G. Naperville, IL $1,000. From one veteran to another. Semper Fi brother. David R. Camp Lejeune, NC $20. My sister works at Marriott downtown and faces the same abuse. Thank you for standing up. Jennifer M. Evanston. Aisle stories poured in from Atlanta and Phoenix and Dallas, from Seattle and Portland, and cities whose names scrolled past too fast to read, people fired for speaking up, threatened for organizing, silenced by the particular species of power that money bought. His phone rang. Sarah. "Jake." Her voice cracked. "Do you realize what you've done? You made this personal for hundreds of thousands of people. They're invested now. They're watching. We can't back down." "I know. Do you, because this isn't just about 18 workers anymore. It's about every person who's ever been told to shut up and take it. Every time someone with power crushed someone without it. You gave them a story where the working guy wins. They need that story. They're going to fight like hell to keep it." After she hung up, Jake sat in the dark of his kitchen watching the numbers climb. By morning, it would be over $180,000. By the end of the week, over $500,000. He'd wanted to help. Instead, he'd started something that felt bigger than help, more dangerous than charity. He'd given people hope, Hope was a weapon, and he had no idea how to aim it. 4 days later, Jake stood outside Oak Park Elementary waiting for Lily's bus. Other parents kept their distance, but Jessica Walker approached with the determined friendliness of someone who'd rehearsed the conversation. "Mr. Morrison?" Northwestern hoodie, genuine smile. "I just wanted to say thank you. My brother in Milwaukee lost his job for reporting safety violations. Seeing you stand up, it meant something. I just did what anyone should have. But most people don't. That's why it matters." Lily's bus pulled up. She emerged, saw the parent talking to her father, and something in her posture shifted. Pride, maybe. Or the weight of knowing that her dad had become someone people thanked instead of someone they ignored. They walked to the truck together. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. 202 area code. Washington, D.C. The text message was brief and impossibly surreal. "Mr. Morrison, this is Senator Elizabeth Price. I chair the Senate Labor Committee. Your story has inspired meaningful conversation about worker protection reform. I'd like to invite you to testify before Congress next month. This could change federal legislation affecting millions of Americans. Please call my office. Senator Price, DPA." Jake stared at the message. At the offer to turn his life into testimony, his daughter's father into a symbol, his small act in a hotel lobby into something that would follow them forever. Lily buckled herself into the back seat. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart." He deleted the message, started the truck, pulled out of the parking lot while his phone continued buzzing with calls he wouldn't answer and opportunities he wouldn't take. The house was 2 miles away. He could see it in his mind, small, paid for safe. Everything he'd built since Diane died. Everything he'd promised to protect. The silver Lexus was parked across the street when they arrived. Richard Hartford stepped out with the casual confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. Silver hair, Tom Ford suit, a watch that probably cost more than Jake's truck and house combined. He walked across the street with his hands visible, non-threatening, every movement calculated for maximum unthreatening appearance. "Mr. Morrison, may I have a moment of your time?" Jake was halfway up the ladder, drill in hand, installing the Ring doorbell he'd bought that morning. He didn't climb down. "Depends what you want." "Just a conversation." Hartford's Connecticut boarding school accent made everything sound reasonable. "I'm a businessman who prefers solving problems with dialogue." "I'm listening." Hartford pulled an envelope from inside his jacket. Slow, deliberate. The kind of move designed to show he wasn't reaching for anything dangerous. He opened it enough for Jake to see cash-thick stack of hundreds, Benjamin Franklin's face repeated dozens of times. $50,000. Cash. No IRS reporting. All you need to do is release a public statement acknowledging yesterday's situation was a misunderstanding. That perhaps you overreacted due to stress from your military service. That you regret any harm to Hartford Hospitality's reputation. Jake set down the drill, climbed down the ladder, kept it between them like a barrier. "You want me to lie? I want you to admit the possibility that you were mistaken." Hartford's voice stayed smooth, practiced. "Think about it. Your daughter goes back to school without reporters following her. Your neighbors stop treating you like a celebrity. Your HVAC business stops losing clients who think controversy is bad for their property values. Everything returns to normal." The envelope sat between them. $50,000. New truck. Lily's college fund. The kind of money that bought space between paycheck and emergency. "Your wife would want you to do what's best for your daughter." Hartford's voice dropped, became intimate, conspiratorial. "I knew Diane, actually. We met at a United Way fundraiser. Lovely woman. Would have wanted you to be smart about this." Something cold settled in Jake's chest. His hands clenched into fists. "No." Hartford's smile vanished like it had never existed. "I'm sorry. Get off my property." The mask dropped. The reasonable businessman disappeared, replaced by something harder, meaner, the kind of cruelty that came with generational wealth and the absolute certainty that consequences were for other people. "You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Morrison." Hartford's voice went ice cold. "I tried to handle this the civilized way. Hartford Hospitality will pursue legal action in Cook County Circuit Court assault, trespassing, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Even if you win eventually, the legal fees will bankrupt your little HVAC business. Your daughter will watch everything you've built crumble. And those 18 workers, they'll stay fired while you burn through that GoFundMe playing hero." Jake stepped forward, still calm, still controlled, but something in his posture changed the shift from civilian to soldier, from man to weapon. "Then I guess it crumbles. Now get off my property before I call Oak Park Police." Hartford's expression twisted into something ugly. "I tried being nice. What comes next won't be." He walked back to his Lexus. Didn't rush. Power move showing he wasn't afraid, wasn't concerned, wasn't anything except slightly inconvenienced by the need to destroy a working man's life. The engine purred to life. Connecticut license plates, Elite 1. Jake watched until the car disappeared around the corner. Then he went inside, locked the door, and checked every window in the house. Twice. Ace Hardware on Harlem Avenue smelled like sawdust and possibility. Jake walked the aisles with Lily loading a cart with Schlager deadbolts and Yale window locks and Honeywell motion sensors, the kind of security upgrade that turned a home into something defensible. The clerk rang them up with the friendliness of someone who hadn't watched the news. "Big security upgrade, just being prepared." "Hey," the clerk's eyes widened with recognition. "You're the guy from—" Jake slid his credit card across the counter. "Just ring it up, please." At home, he worked while Lily did homework at the kitchen table, installing deadbolts, testing windows, mounting sensors that would flood the yard with light if anything moved. The work was meditative, the kind of task that let his hands remember competence while his mind sorted through the impossible math of what came next. When he opened the hall closet, the gun safe looked exactly as he'd left it. Combination lock. Steel construction. The physical barrier between who he'd been and who he was trying to become. His hands moved through the sequence automatically. The safe opened. This time he took out the Sig Sauer, checked the chamber, loaded a magazine with the muscle memory of having done it 10,000 times in places where loaded meant alive and unloaded meant dead. He placed the weapon in his bedroom closet top shelf behind blankets from Costco, where Lily would never think to look, where he could reach it in 3 seconds if he needed to. He was closing the safe when Lily appeared in the doorway. "When did we get the camera?" She pointed at the red light blinking above the front door. "Today. Just an extra security measure. Because of the hotel thing. Just because." She studied his face with those eyes that saw too much. "Dad, are we in danger?" He knelt to her level, hands on her shoulders, meeting her gaze directly, because that's what fathers did. They lied about monsters under the bed but told the truth about monsters in suits. "No, sweetheart, we're not in danger, but sometimes when adults disagree about important things, they try to make life difficult for each other. I'm just being extra careful. That's what dads do." "Would you do it again?" "Helping that lady." "If you knew all this would happen," he didn't hesitate. "Every single time." She hugged him, the kind of fierce grip that said she understood more than she wanted to, but loved him anyway. That night after she was asleep, Jake sat at the kitchen table with cold coffee and thoughts that wouldn't quiet. Every sound made him tense. Neighbor's cat on the fence. His hand moved toward his hip, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Wind rattling windows. His eyes snapped to the source calculating angles and entry points. Distant car door, his whole body shifted to alert, ready for threats that existed only in memory. He checked the gun safe one more time, touched the Sig Sauer's grip, felt the weight of choices he'd made and choices coming fast. He looked down the hallway at Lily's closed door, Disney princess stickers catching ambient light from the street. His phone buzzed. Text message. Detective Marcus Shaw, Chicago PD, 15th District. Need to speak with you about ongoing investigation. Can you come to the station tomorrow? Jake stared at the message, at the invitation to official consequences, to the machinery of law, catching up with the machinery of violence. He typed, "What time? 2 p.m., 5701 W. Madison." The 15th District Police Station smelled like burnt coffee and institutional cleaning supplies. Jake walked through doors that had processed thousands of Chicago's small tragedies, domestic calls and theft reports, and all the mundane violence that accumulated in a city this size. Michael Brennan met him in the lobby, briefcase in hand, Boston accent cutting through the ambient chaos of ringing phones and desk work. "Remember, don't answer anything without me present. If it feels like interrogation, you stop talking. Cook County prosecutors play hardball." Detective Marcus Shaw appeared from deeper in the building. 40-something. Black. South Side accent that carried the weight of 15 years watching this city break people. He extended his hand. "Mr. Morrison, thanks for coming in." They walked through the station together. Busy officers at desks, someone being processed at booking, the particular energy of law enforcement, trying to hold back chaos, one report at a time. Shaw made small talk about Lily, about how kids handled attention better than adults, about the weather turning cold early this year. The interview room was small. Metal table, 3 chairs, recording equipment that wasn't turned on yet. A single photograph lay on the table, the security guard in Jake's submission hold, arm twisted, face showing the kind of pain that came from joints being taken past their limits. Shaw sat, slid the photo toward Jake. "Walk me through what you saw, what you felt, why you acted." So Jake explained. Woman against a wall, guards using their size as threat. The calculation he'd made in the space between heartbeats, intervene or walk away. The hold he'd used, the pressure he'd applied, the restraint it had taken to stop before something broke that couldn't be unbroken. Shaw took notes, asked about distances, angles, threat assessment. His questions had this precision of someone who understood violence professionally, who knew the difference between reaction and choice. "You have Delta Force training." Shaw leaned back, studied Jake with eyes that had seen too much to be impressed easily. "You could have seriously injured that man. Dislocated shoulder, broken arm, crushed his trachea. Why didn't you?" "Because that wasn't necessary to stop him." Jake's voice stayed steady. "Violence should be proportional. You use minimum force required, nothing more. That's what they teach you, not just how to hurt, but when not to." Shaw nodded slowly. "Most guys with your background, they come home and struggle with that, knowing when to use it versus when to walk away. I see it all the time, vets who can't turn it off." "I struggle with it every day, detective. But struggling means you're still trying. The day you stop struggling is the day you become dangerous." Something shifted in Shaw's expression. Recognition, maybe, or respect. He closed his notebook, stood. "I'll be recommending no charges to State's Attorney Fox's office. Based on this interview and available evidence, I don't see criminal intent. You saw someone in distress and intervened with appropriate force. That's not assault under Illinois law. That's being a citizen." They shook hands. Shaw's voice dropped, became personal rather than official. "For what it's worth, my daughter works at Palmer House Hilton. She's told me stories that make me sick, wage theft, harassment threats if they complain. Someone needed to stand up. I'm glad it was someone who knew how to do it right." They walked back through the station together. At the lobby, Shaw stopped. "Cops see a lot of bad every day on the West Side. Gang shootings, kids getting hurt, people who should protect each other hurting each other instead. It's good to see someone doing something good for a change. Outside, Michael pulled out his phone, started typing rapidly. That's one threat neutralized, but Hartford has others. Legal, financial. He's got enough lawyers to bury you in paperwork even if you never see the inside of a courtroom. Jake's phone buzzed. Text from Sarah. Meeting tonight. Pilsen Community Center. All 18 workers. We need to talk about next steps. The community center on 18th Street had been a union hall once, back when unions meant something in Chicago beyond history lessons. Now, it served whoever needed space ESL classes, job training, the occasional gathering of people who'd been reminded that solidarity wasn't just a word, but a survival strategy. 18 workers sat in folding chairs arranged in a rough circle. Anxious. Uncertain. The kind of people who'd learned that hope was expensive and usually came with hidden costs. Patricia Washington stood at the center, 61 years old, Alabama farm worker, roots decades of organizing in Chicago's most forgotten neighborhoods. Her voice carried authority that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with having earned it. This is Jake Morrison and his daughter Lily. Jake raised over $500,000 for you through GoFundMe. Let's give him space to speak. Jake stood, uncomfortable with attention, with being the center of something that felt bigger than helping. I'm not good at speeches, but I want you to know what happened to you is wrong. You spoke truth about wage theft and got punished. That's not how things should work. Rosa Martinez started crying before he'd finished. Single mother from Pilsen. 3 kids. 12 years at the Sterling Grand, and all she had to show for it was a termination letter and memories of being told she should be grateful for the opportunity to be exploited. Carlos Rivera gripped Jake's hand hard enough to hurt. Maintenance supervisor from Little Village. His daughter had just started Northwestern on a full academic scholarship, and he'd been about to tell her she needed to live at home, take the Blue Line to campus, forget about the dorm experience because her father couldn't afford it anymore. My daughter starts Northwestern next month. Carlos's voice broke. I didn't know how to pay for her books, her meal plan. I thought I'd have to tell her to defer. He couldn't finish. Jake's eyes stung. Single tear escaped before he could stop it. He wiped it, quickly gripped Carlos's shoulder. Your daughter's going to do great things. Make sure she knows her father fought for what's right. That's worth more than any tuition. Patricia distributed checks while Michael explained legal strategy. Federal lawsuit under labor trafficking statutes, state charges for wage theft, civil suit for wrongful termination, the long grinding process of making powerful people pay for sins they'd committed with impunity. But underneath the legal talk, underneath the strategy and planning, sat a harder question. Carlos stood. What happens if we lose, if Hartford wins in court and we don't get our jobs back? What then? Then you still have this money to start over. Patricia's voice stayed firm. And we keep fighting. Rosa's voice shook. And if he comes after us, Hartford's connected to Mayor Johnson, to Cook County judges. He could make things worse. The room went silent. Workers exchanging glances waited with the particular fear that came from knowing power didn't play fair, didn't follow rules, didn't stop until it won or found easier targets. Jake looked at their faces, at the hope fighting with fear, at people who'd been told their whole lives that standing up meant getting knocked down. He's already coming after you, Jake said quietly. Question isn't whether he'll fight. Question is whether you'll fight back together or scatter alone. The silence stretched. Then Carlos nodded. Rosa nodded. One by one, 18 people who'd been fired for telling the truth decided that maybe the truth was worth fighting for after all. 3 weeks later, Jake was in a Lakeview brownstone basement replacing a Carrier furnace when his phone rang. Sarah's number. They're offering a settlement. Jake set down his wrench, climbed out from under ductwork. What kind? full reinstatement for all 18 workers, back pay under Illinois Wage Payment Act, formal apology in the Tribune, 5-year independent audit by Cook County Inspector General. It's everything we asked for. What's the catch? No public admission of wrongdoing, confidentiality agreement, and you go away quietly, no Senate testimony, no interviews, no victory laps. Jake walked to the basement window. Outside, Chicago moved through its afternoon rhythms, indifferent to the small dramas of people trying to survive in its margins. Why the sudden generosity? Sarah's pause told him everything before she spoke. FBI's involved. Federal prosecutors at Northern District. Some of Hartford's violations crossed into trafficking, confiscating documents, threatening deportation. He wants the civil cases settled before criminal charges make everything worse. What do the workers want? Most want to settle. They need their jobs, Jake. They're terrified of dragging this out with no guarantee of winning. And the ones who don't. 3 of them want blood, want Hartford facing consequences on the news. Carlos is most vocal, says some things matter more than paychecks. Jake thought about his daughter, about the gun in his closet, about the difference between winning battles and winning wars. Don't answer yet. Set up a meeting. All 18 workers. Tonight if possible. Jake, deadline is tomorrow at 5. We have time. These people have been told what to do by powerful men their whole lives. They should decide their own future together. That evening, 18 workers gathered again in the Pilsen Community Center. But this time they stood paced, sat on floors. The static energy of people about to make a choice that would define them. Patricia facilitated. Rosa argued for settling. She needed the job, needed the security needed to believe the system could work even imperfectly. Carlos argued for fighting. Hartford needed to admit guilt. Face consequences, become an example that scared other billionaires straight. The debate went in circles, passionate but respectful, the kind of argument that happened between people who disagreed about tactics but agreed about what mattered. Lily stood. The room quieted. "Can I say something?" Patricia smiled. "Of course, honey." Lily held up the yellow crane, still bent, still showing its damage. "My dad told me that sometimes you can't fix things all the way back to perfect. This crane got crushed. I fixed it with tape, but it's still bent. See?" She tossed it gently. It glided across the circle, landed in the center. "But it still flies. It's different than before, but it's still good. Maybe even better because now it has a story." She looked around the circle. "Maybe the settlement is like that. Not perfect, but still good. Still better than staying crushed." Carlos picked up the crane, studied it like it contained answers to questions he hadn't known how to ask. "My daughter studies engineering at Northwestern. She told me the strongest structures aren't the ones that never bend. They're the ones that bend in the wind and spring back. She said flexibility isn't weakness, it's survival." He turned to face the group. "I wanted to fight. Wanted Hartford destroyed on the news. But maybe this 8-year-old is smarter than all of us. Maybe accepting a good win is better than holding out for perfect." Patricia called for a vote. Show of hands. 16 raised, 2 down. "It's decided," Patricia said. "We accept the settlement." Workers exhaled collectively. Some cried, some hugged, some just sat with the weight of having chosen pragmatism over revenge and hoping they'd remember why when doubt came calling later. Jake found Carlos afterward. "Before you go back to the Sterling Grand, can I ask you something? Anything, brother. Would you let me teach Maria about HVAC systems? Real-world knowledge might help with her engineering degree." Carlos's eyes filled. "She'd be honored. I'd be honored." They shook hands, pulled into a brief hug. Working-class solidarity that didn't need words. Sarah pulled Jake aside as workers filed out. "Settlement's good, but it's not over. FBI's moving forward with criminal charges regardless. This could get ugly." Jake nodded, understanding that personal battles ended, but larger wars continued. Outside, October evening had turned cold. Chicago preparing for winter the way it always did, sudden, unforgiving, without apology. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. 202 area code. Senator Price again. Your story inspired bipartisan legislation. The Morrison Act passed Committee 18-4. Floor vote next month. Will you reconsider testifying? Your voice could help millions. Jake read it twice, felt the weight of becoming symbol instead of person, of having his small choice in a hotel lobby turned into something that would follow his daughter forever. He typed, Senator, I appreciate the honor, but I need to focus on my daughter and my community. That's where I can do the most good. Best of luck with the vote. Sent. Deleted thread. Put phone away. Lily took his hand. What was that? Nothing important. They walked to the truck together. Father and daughter. Just two people in a city of millions trying to do right in a world that made right so much harder than it needed to be. The drive home took them past the Sterling Grand. Lights blazing. Doormen in uniforms. Wealth on display like it had never been interrupted by something as small as justice. But somewhere inside 18 workers would return Monday morning. Not because the system worked, but because people had decided it should. That was something. Maybe not everything, but something. The paperwork arrived on a Tuesday morning in November. Jake sat at his kitchen table, coffee going cold, reading through settlement documents that turned 18 lives back toward stability. Reinstatement letters, back pay calculations. The formal apology Hartford Hospitality would publish in the Tribune, carefully worded to admit nothing while sounding like everything. Michael had flagged the confidentiality clause in yellow highlighter, standard language that made silence the price of victory. Jake signed anyway. The workers had voted. Democracy meant honoring choices even when you disagreed with them. He was sealing the envelope when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Mr. Morrison, this is Special Agent Chen, FBI, Chicago Field Office. We need to discuss Richard Hartford's criminal case. Would you be willing to testify before a federal grand jury? Jake looked out the window at Lily's swing set at the ordinary Tuesday morning, unfolding across Oak Park, when Bamati. 1 week later, Rosa Martinez walked back into the Sterling Grand wearing her housekeeper uniform for the first time in a month. The lobby looked the same, marble chandeliers, the particular hush that money demanded. But the faces behind the desk were different. New management. Midwest Hospitality Partners, the paperwork said. A company that had bought the hotel in emergency liquidation after Hartford's legal troubles made keeping it impossible. She took a photo with her iPhone. Sent it to Jake. Different than before, but still good. Thank you, brother. Rosa Pilson. Carlos returned the same day, training a new hire from Little Village, teaching him the systems Hartford's people had neglected for years while skimming maintenance budgets. He showed the kid how to spot deferred repairs, how to document safety violations, how to speak up before small problems became catastrophic failures. At noon, he texted Jake a photo of himself in the maintenance office. Back where I belong. Maria says hi from Northwestern. Carlos. But not everyone celebrated. 3 properties in Hartford's empire had already been sold. 4 more were under FBI investigation. Employees at hotels in Milwaukee and Indianapolis were coming forward with their own stories. Wage theft, document confiscation threats whispered in break rooms by men who thought power made them invincible. The federal case was building. Slowly. The way justice moved when it actually moved instead of just pretending. 2 weeks after the settlement, Jake stood in his garage workshop teaching Maria Rivera about HVAC systems. She took notes in a moleskin notebook while he pointed to the disassembled train compressor spread across the workbench. This is what 15 years of deferred maintenance looks like. He showed her corroded brass connections. Failed gaskets, the accumulated damage of owners who cut costs until systems failed. Engineering isn't just about making things work. It's about making them work safely, ethically, for the people who depend on them. Maria studied the components with the focus of someone who understood that knowledge was power, that her Northwestern degree would mean more if she could connect theory to the reality of Chicago buildings and the people who kept them running. Carlos appeared in the doorway, watched his daughter learn, wiped his eyes when she wasn't looking. Jake's phone buzzed. Text from Michael Brennan. New hotel ownership wants to meet you. 6 figures. Office at Willis Tower. Chance to create systemic change across the Midwest. He showed the message to Carlos, who read it and laughed. You gonna take it? Jake looked at his garage, at his tools, at the life he'd built one furnace repair at a time in a city that didn't care about men like him except when they became stories. No. Why not? Because I'm not working class by choice. I'm working class because that's who I am. Changing my office doesn't change that. Carlos nodded, understanding something about identity that didn't fit on job applications or in boardrooms at Willis Tower. Later, after Maria had left, after Carlos had gripped his hand one more time in gratitude that didn't need words, Jake typed his response. Thank you for the offer. I'm happy where I am. He sent it before he could reconsider. The call from the FBI came on a gray December morning. Special Agent Chen, professional voice carrying the weight of a case that had grown beyond Chicago into something federal and sprawling. We've filed charges. Multiple counts: labor trafficking, document fraud, conspiracy to violate civil rights, wire fraud across state lines. Hartford's looking at 15 to 25 years if convicted. Jake listened to the details. Testimony from 47 workers across 3 states. Documentation from Department of Labor raids. Financial records showing systematic wage theft totaling $8.7 million. The architecture of exploitation laid bare in federal court filings. We'd like you to testify. Grand jury first, then trial if it goes that far. Your intervention at the Sterling Grand started this. The jury should hear why. When? January. We'll coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office, make sure your schedule works. After hanging up, Jake sat at his kitchen table thinking about Diane's funeral, about coming home to a daughter who didn't know him, about the choice he'd made to stop being a soldier and start being a father. He'd thought that choice was permanent. Turns out you didn't stop fighting, you just picked new battles in different places. His phone buzzed. Text from Sarah. Turn on WGN. Now. He found the remote, turned on the television. Richard Hartford in handcuffs. FBI perp walk outside the Dirksen Federal Building downtown. Silver hair disheveled, Tom Ford suit wrinkled. The Connecticut aristocrat looking small and human and terrified in a way Jake suspected he'd never been before. His attorney from Sidley Austin read a statement, the usual denials, the promises of exoneration, the theater of innocence performed for cameras while everyone involved knew the truth. But it was the protesters outside the Sterling Grand that made Jake's chest tighten. Signs reading workers. Profits and justice for the 18. Faces he recognized from the community center meeting. Rosa. Carlos. Teresa. People who'd been crushed and had chosen to fly anyway. Lily came into the living room, saw the TV, climbed onto the couch beside him. Is that the man from Connecticut who tried to give you money? Yeah, sweetheart. Good. I'm glad the FBI got him. She said it with the absolute moral clarity of 8 years old. No complexity, no doubt. Just the simple understanding that people who hurt others should face consequences. Jake pulled her close, kissed the top of her head, hoped she'd keep that clarity longer than most people managed. His phone buzzed again. Different number. 202 area code. Senator Price. Third time she'd tried. The message was longer this time. Mr. Morrison. I understand your reluctance, but the Morrison Act passed the Senate 73-27. It protects worker whistleblowers, creates federal oversight for labor violations, establishes penalties for retaliation. Your story made this possible. The president wants to meet you at the signing. Your daughter, too. This is your legacy. Jake read it twice, felt the pull of history of being remembered for something larger than fixing furnaces in Chicago basements. He typed, "Senator, I appreciate everything you've done, but I need to focus on my daughter and my community here in Oak Park. That's where I can do the most good. I trust you'll do what's right for American workers. Congratulations on the bill. Send. Delete 3 did." "What was that?" Lily asked. "Nothing important." But it was important, and he knew it. He just knew that being a father to one girl in Oak Park mattered more than being a symbol to millions he'd never meet. Some debts couldn't be paid with legislation, only with presence. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in January, Jake drove downtown with Lily to return to where it started. She'd asked to go back to see the hotel again to place something she'd made in the lobby as a reminder. They parked in the same garage, walked through the same revolving doors, stepped into the same marble lobby that had witnessed violence and intervention, and the small choice that had changed everything. But it was different. The concierge who greeted them was new young woman, kind face name tag reading, Amber. "Good morning. Welcome to the Sterling Grand. How can I help you?" No suspicion, no judgment. Just Midwest hospitality doing what it was supposed to do. "We're just visiting," Jake said. "Take your time." Security guards in different uniforms, Midwest hospitality, not Hartford's mercenaries, stood near the entrance with the relaxed posture of people hired to help rather than intimidate. One of them nodded at Jake. Recognition without hostility. Rosa appeared from the service elevator, saw them, her face transformed. "Mr. Morrison, Lily." She crossed the lobby almost running, embraced Jake like family. "I didn't know you were coming." Lily wanted to see the hotel again. Rosa knelt to Lily's level. "Did you bring any new cranes, mija?" Lily pulled a red crane from her pocket. Perfectly folded. Pristine. "I made this one special. For the hotel." "What should we do with it?" Lily walked to a small table in the hallway leading to the VIP lounge. Fresh flowers in a Waterford vase. Millennium Park visible through the window, winter morning light on ice sculptures and frozen fountains. She placed the crane carefully beside the flowers, adjusted it so it would be visible from the lobby. "It's a reminder," she said, "that things can get better, that people can change, that even crushed things can be fixed if you care enough." Rosa wiped her eyes. "We'll take care of it forever, I promise." A woman approached Catherine Webb, the new general manager, 40-something, professional but warm, Minnesota accent that sounded honest after years of Hartford's Connecticut condescension. "Mr. Morrison," she extended her hand, "I wanted to thank you personally. What you did didn't just change this hotel. It changed how I think about running a business. We're implementing your model at 3 other properties, Chicago, Milwaukee, Indianapolis." "I didn't have a model. I just did what was right." "That is the model." Her voice was gentle. "Treating people with dignity, respecting workers. It shouldn't be revolutionary, but somehow it is." They stood in the lobby talking while workers moved around them with the kind of relaxed efficiency that came from not being afraid. A bellhop paused to photograph Lily's crane. A housekeeper smiled at it, then pushed her cart with something that looked like renewed purpose. Small changes, quiet dignity restored. The kind of victory that didn't make headlines but changed lives. Outside, winter sun made the Chicago River shine like steel. Jake held Lily's hand as they walked back to the truck. "Do you think people will remember?" she asked. "What happened here? Some will, some won't, but the ones who need to remember will. Like the workers. Like the workers." They drove home through neighborhoods that had been breaking and healing and breaking again for as long as anyone could remember. Chicago kept moving, indifferent to small dramas. But maybe Jake thought the small dramas were what made the city worth saving. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Jake received an email from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Richard Hartford had pleaded guilty. 12 years at FCI Greenville in southern Illinois. $8.7 million in restitution to workers across Hartford hospitality properties. The prosecutors had him cold testimony documents financial records that showed exploitation as business model rather than accident. He'd taken the plea to avoid trial to prevent more workers from telling their stories under oath to maintain whatever scraps of dignity remained. Justice moved slow, but it moved. Jake forwarded the email to Sarah, to Michael, to Patricia. Watched the replies come in celebration, mixed with exhaustion, the particular weariness that came from winning battles that should never have needed fighting. His phone rang. Sarah's number. "We did it," she said. Her voice carried tears. "We actually did it. The workers did it. They stood up when standing up cost them everything." "You started it, started. Don't downplay that." "I was just there. That's all any of us can do, Jake. Be there when it matters." After she hung up, he sat in the dark of his kitchen thinking about moments and choices and the way small decisions accumulated into lives. He'd intervened in a hotel lobby because his daughter was watching, and he wanted her to learn that doing right mattered more than staying safe. Everything else, the viral video, the fundraising, the settlement, the federal case had grown from that single moment, the way trees grew from seeds. You planted something and hoped it took root, and tried not to think too hard about what you'd started. His phone buzzed one last time. Text from Carlos. "Maria wants to thank you." "Can we come by tomorrow?" "Carlos, anytime." Jake, he turned off his phone, checked the locks twice, looked in on Lily sleeping peacefully, paper cranes on her dresser, keeping watch. Diane's photo beside them, smiling from Navy Pier, holding baby Lily, like she'd always known this moment was coming. "She did good," Jake whispered to the photograph. "Our girl did real good." Then he went to bed and slept better than he had in months. 6 months later, Oak Park smelled like summer and possibility. Jake stood in his backyard on a Saturday afternoon, grilling burgers for a gathering that had grown beyond his initial invitation. Rosa and her 3 kids, Carlos and Maria, Patricia Washington, Michael Brennan making the drive from downtown, Sarah Blake bringing her husband and twin daughters. The backyard wasn't big enough for this many people. They spilled into the garage onto the driveway across the lawn that needed mowing. Lily ran between adults with Rosa's youngest daughter, both of them wielding water pistols and shrieking with the particular joy of children who'd been given permission to be loud. Maria stood at the grill with Jake, asking questions about heat distribution and propane pressure with the same focus she brought to her engineering classes. She'd completed her freshman year at Northwestern with a 3.9 GPA and a summer internship at a firm that designed sustainable HVAC systems for low-income housing. "Mr. Morrison taught me more than my thermodynamics professor," she told anyone who'd listen. "He showed me how theory connects to people's lives." Carlos stood nearby with a beer, watching his daughter talk about compressor efficiency, his eyes wet with the kind of pride that didn't need words. Sarah found Jake between burger flips. "There's something I want to show you." She pulled out her iPad, pulled up a website. Chicago Workers Alliance. The page showed photos from the Sterling Grant campaign testimonials from the 18 Workers, a donation button that led to a new fund supporting labor organizing across Illinois. "We've raised another $200,000 since the settlement. We're using it to help other workers fight back. Patricia's coordinating with unions across the Midwest." "That's good." "It's more than good, Jake. You started something that won't stop. People saw what happened here and realized they didn't have to accept exploitation, that fighting back was possible." She showed him another page. The Morrison Act passed into law in March, signed by the president with bipartisan support. Federal protections for whistleblowers, mandatory oversight of labor practices, real penalties for companies that retaliated against workers who spoke up. Your name is on legislation that will protect millions of people. That's Legacy Jake, whether you want it or not. He flipped a burger, checked the temperature, tried to find words for what it meant to be remembered for doing the right thing when you'd only been trying to show your daughter how to live. Legacy is what you leave for people you'll never meet. I'm more interested in the people I will meet, like right now, in my backyard, eating burgers I'm probably burning. Sarah laughed. You're impossible. I'm consistent. Lily appeared with a paper crane blue, this time perfectly folded. She'd been teaching Rosa's daughter how to make them, passing along the skill her mother had taught her before Diane's accident. Dad, can we give this one to Ms. Sarah for helping all those people? Sarah knelt down, took the crane with the reverence it deserved. Thank you, Lily. I'll keep this forever. It's a promise, Lily said seriously, that we'll keep fighting when people need help. Then I'll honor that promise. The afternoon stretched into evening. Burgers became s'mores around a fire pit Jake had built from YouTube instructions and hope. Stories got told and retold, the hotel confrontation taking on mythic qualities, with each iteration growing larger than the truth, but somehow more true because of it. Carlos told the story of the settlement vote, of Lily's wisdom about broken things that still flew. Patricia told stories from her own years organizing, connecting their small victory to decades of workers choosing dignity over fear. Rosa talked about going back to work that first Monday, about walking into the Sterling Grand knowing she'd helped change it. Michael raised his beer. To Jake Morrison, who proved that one person standing up can start a movement. To the 18 workers, Jake corrected, who stood up when it cost them everything. They drank to that, to courage that looked like ordinary people making extraordinary choices, to the slow work of justice that happened in community centers and courtrooms and backyard gatherings where people decided that connection mattered more than comfort. As the sun set over Oak Park, painting the sky orange and purple, Lily sat beside Jake on the back porch, watching adults talk and laugh and remember. She leaned against him, small and warm and growing too fast. Are we famous now? She asked quietly. No, sweetheart. We're just people who did something that mattered. Will we always be the people from the hotel thing? He thought about the question, about the way moments defined you whether you wanted them to or not, about the difference between being known for something and being reduced to it. We get to be whoever we choose. What happened is part of our story, but it's not the whole story. We're still the people who make paper cranes and watch documentaries and burn pancakes on Sunday mornings. You burn pancakes, I just eat them. He laughed, pulled her close. The important thing is we don't let one moment define us. We did something good. Now we keep doing good things in smaller, quieter ways. That's how you build a life, one good choice at a time. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, can I tell you a secret? Always. I'm glad you helped that lady at the hotel, even though it was scary and complicated. Because now I know, like really know, that when something's wrong, you're supposed to do something about it, even if it's hard. His eyes burned. He blinked hard, forced the tears back. That's exactly the lesson I hoped you'd learn, sweetheart. That's everything I ever wanted to teach you. They sat together while the party continued around them. Carlos teaching Michael Brennan how to make a proper s'more. Patricia telling Rosa's kids stories about her grandmother who'd organized farm workers in Alabama. Sarah and her husband comparing notes about raising daughters in a city that felt like it was always one crisis away from breaking. The kind of evening that felt ordinary while it was happening, but would be remembered as sacred later when distance gave perspective, and you understood that these were the moments that mattered, not the headlines or the legislation or the federal cases. The backyard gatherings, the teaching, the passing along of knowledge from one generation to another in the faith that someone would remember why it mattered. That night, after everyone had left and the yard was quiet again, Jake tucked Lily into bed with the familiar ritual. 2 quilts, Build-A-Bear, water on the nightstand, paper cranes on her dresser, yellow bent one from the Sterling Grand, red one from their return visit, blue one from today, dozens of others accumulating like prayers or promises or small acts of hope made manifest. Diane's photo beside them, Navy Pier, laughing, holding baby Lily. "Dad?" Lily's voice was drowsy. "Yeah, sweetheart." "What happens next?" "Tomorrow I have 2 HVAC jobs. You have swimming lessons at the Oak Park pool. We need groceries from Jewel. Life continues." "That sounds nice." "Nice is underrated. Nice means safe. Nice means normal. That's a gift." She was already half asleep. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, sweetheart. More than anything." He stood in the doorway watching her breathe, in and out. The most important sound in the world. Everything he'd done, the army, the deployments, the choice to come home, the intervention at the hotel, the months of fighting that followed, all of it came down to this: making sure she was safe, making sure she knew her father was someone who did the right thing even when it cost him something, making sure she understood that being ordinary didn't mean being powerless, that small people could stand up to big power, that doing right mattered more than being comfortable. He closed her door, walked to the living room, stood at the window looking out at Oak Park settling into Saturday night. Porch lights, garage doors, the distant sound of the blue line heading downtown. Normal. Quiet. The life he'd built one day at a time after Diane died, after the army, after everything that had tried to break him had failed. His eyes found Diane's photo on the mantel. 5x7 frame. Professional portrait from better days. "I think we did okay," he said to her, to the memory of her, to the space where she used to be. "Our girl's going to be fine. Better than fine. She's going to change the world in small ways that matter, just like you did." The photo didn't answer. Photos never did. But standing there in the dark of his living room, Jake felt something settle in his chest. Not peace. Peace was too absolute, too final. But something like it. Acceptance, maybe. The understanding that he'd done what he could with what he had in the moments he was given. Some debts couldn't be paid. Some losses couldn't be recovered. Some choices couldn't be unmade. But you could choose what came next, every day, every moment, every decision between doing right and doing easy. He'd chosen right, and his daughter had learned to choose it too. That was legacy enough. 7 months after the settlement, on a cold February morning, Jake received a letter from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Richard Hartford had been transferred to FCI Greenville. Prisoner number 47829-424. 12 years. Eligible for parole in 9 if he behaved. The letter included a victim impact statement form, an invitation to tell Hartford how his actions had affected Jake's life, to demand restitution beyond the $8.7 million already ordered, to claim a piece of justice that went beyond legal proceedings. Jake read the form twice, then filed it in the folder with his discharge papers and classification documents from deployments he couldn't discuss. Things that had happened, things that were over, things that didn't need to be revisited to remain real. Hartford was in prison. The workers had their jobs. The system had worked imperfectly but substantially. That was enough. He went back to work, fixed a furnace in Lakeview, replaced a compressor in Lincoln Park, taught a customer's teenage son about thermodynamics while the kid's father watched with the particular pride parents felt when their children learned useful things from competent strangers. At lunch, he checked his phone. Text from Maria. "Professor loved my paper on HVAC ethics in affordable housing. Said it showed real-world knowledge beyond the classroom. Thank you for teaching me." Maria. He smiled. Typed back. "You did the work. I just showed you where to look." That evening, he picked up Lily from school. She climbed into the truck with her backpack and a permission slip for a field trip to the Museum of Science and Industry. "Can we go to the hotel again sometime?" she asked. "I want to make another crane to put there." "Why?" "Because Ms. Rosa said people keep taking pictures of the red one. She said it reminds them that good things are possible. I want to make more good things possible." Jake looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. 8 years old and already understanding things about hope and symbols and the way small acts accumulated into movements. "Yes, sweetheart, we can go back. Next Saturday. Next Saturday." They drove home through Chicago traffic through neighborhoods segregated by money and history and choices made generations ago that still shaped who lived where and how they survived. But Lily was humming, making plans for her next crane, already thinking about what color, what message, what promise she wanted to fold into paper and leave for strangers who needed reminding that change was possible. Some debts got paid in small ways, one crane at a time, one child learning to care, one father teaching what mattered. That was enough. That was everything. On a Saturday morning in June, nearly a year after the Sterling Grand incident, Jake stood in his garage teaching a group of 5 kids about HVAC systems. Maria had brought 3 of her Northwestern classmates. Rosa's oldest daughter was there taking notes. Lily sat on a workbench asking questions that showed she'd been paying attention all year. The garage smelled like motor oil and coffee, and the particular species of focused attention that came when people wanted to learn things that mattered. "Engineering isn't just equations," Jake was saying, showing them a failed heat exchanger from a Lincoln Park brownstone. "It's about understanding that every system you design affects real people. This exchanger failed because someone cut costs on materials. The family living there had no heat for 3 days in January. Their baby got sick. That's what happens when you prioritize profit over people." Maria took notes. Her classmates took notes. Rosa's daughter recorded video on her phone to show her engineering teacher at school. Lily raised her hand like she was still in class instead of her own garage. "Dad, isn't that what happened at the hotel, Mr. Hartford, prioritizing profit over Ms. Sarah and all those workers?" "Exactly that, sweetheart. Same principle, different scale." After the lesson, after the kids had left with photocopied diagrams and renewed sense that engineering mattered because people mattered, Jake found Carlos waiting by the driveway. "Maria's talking about changing her major," Carlos said. "From general engineering to sustainable systems design. Says she wants to create HVAC solutions for affordable housing that don't cost more than families can afford." "That's good work. You inspired that. You know that, right?" Jake shrugged, uncomfortable with credit for things that felt like just passing along what he knew. "I just showed her what was possible. She's doing the hard part. That's what teaching is, brother. Showing people what's possible." They stood in comfortable silence, watching summer afternoon unfold across Oak Park. Kids on bikes, families walking dogs, the ordinary rhythms of a neighborhood that had been here before Jake arrived and would be here after he left. "Sarah called me yesterday," Carlos said. "Asked if I wanted to speak at a labor organizing conference in Milwaukee. Tell our story. Help other workers understand they can fight back." "You going to do it?" "I don't know. Public speaking isn't my thing." "Wasn't mine either." Carlos laughed. "You never spoke publicly." "Exactly. And the world kept turning. You don't have to do everything people ask. You just have to do what matters to you." "What if what matters is both helping my family and helping other families?" "Then you figure out how to do both. Or you pick one and trust someone else to do the other. There's always more work than workers. Always more fights than fighters. You do what you can with what you have." Carlos nodded slowly. Understanding something about limits and choices, and the difference between being responsible for everything and being responsible for what you could actually affect. After he left, Jake sat on his back porch with a beer watching Lily and Rosa's daughter play with water pistols in the yard, shrieking and laughing and making the kind of summer memories that would last longer than any headline. His phone buzzed. Email from the Tribune. Rebecca Mitchell's name in the subject line. 1 year later. The Sterling Grand workers speak out. He almost deleted it. Almost decided that looking backward when forward existed wasn't useful. But curiosity won. The article was long. Interviews with all 18 workers. Photos of them at their jobs in their homes with their families. Stories of what the settlement had meant not just financially, but in terms of dignity restored. Fear lifted the ability to imagine futures that included more than survival. Rosa talked about her promotion to floor supervisor, about teaching new hires that they had rights and didn't need to accept abuse. Carlos talked about Maria at Northwestern, about standing up to Hartford as the most important thing he'd ever done for his daughter's future. Teresa talked about going back to school for her GED, about believing again that change was possible. At the end, Rebecca had asked each of them the same question. What did Jake Morrison's intervention mean to you? The answers varied in words but unified in theme. He showed us we weren't alone. He proved that doing right mattered more than staying safe. He gave us permission to believe that ordinary people could stand up to extraordinary power. Jake read them all, then closed the email and went back to watching his daughter play. Words were nice. Articles were nice. But this summer evening in his backyard, Lily laughing water pistols and shrieking, and the simple gift of childhood uninterrupted by fear, this was what mattered. This was what he'd fought for. Not headlines, not legislation, not legacy, just this. That night after Lily was asleep, Jake stood at her bedroom door, watching paper cranes catch light from the street lamp outside. Yellow bent one, red pristine one, blue one from the backyard gathering, green one she'd made yesterday, dozens accumulating like prayers. Diane's photo beside them. Navy Pier. Always Navy Pier. The best day Diane had called it. Finding out she was pregnant, feeling Lily kick for the first time, believing the future held more joy than pain. She'd been wrong about the pain, but right about the joy. I did what I could, Jake whispered to the photo. Taught her what mattered, showed her how to stand up. Let her see that doing right costs something, but staying silent costs more. The photo didn't answer, but standing there watching his daughter breathe, watching paper cranes hold vigil, Jake felt something he'd been missing since Diane's funeral 6 years ago. Not closure. Closure was a lie people told to make grief manageable. But continuity. The understanding that what he'd started with Diane, building a life, raising a daughter, trying to make the world slightly better than they'd found it, continued. That Lily carried both of them forward into whatever came next. That was enough. That was everything. He closed her door, walked to his bedroom, opened the closet where the Sig Sauer still sat on the top shelf behind Costco blankets. He'd loaded it after Hartford's threat, kept it ready for violence that never came. 9 months later, it remained loaded ready, a reminder that some threats were real and preparation wasn't paranoia. But tonight, Jake unloaded it, locked it back in the safe, spun the dial to seal it away. The threat had passed. Hartford was in FCI Greenville. The workers were protected. The system had worked well enough that vigilance could relax into something closer to normal. He went to bed and slept 8 hours straight for the first time in a year. The next morning was Sunday. Pancakes. Lily at the table folding a purple crane while Jake burned breakfast with the consistency of ritual. Dad, she looked up from her folding. When I'm older, can I help people like you did? You already help people, sweetheart. Every time you make a crane and give it away. Every time you're kind to someone who needs it. Every time you stand up when something's wrong. But I mean really help, like change things. He slid a pancake onto her plate. Not burnt this time. Progress. Then yeah, you can change things. But remember, change doesn't always look like the news makes it look. Sometimes change is quiet. It's teaching someone something they didn't know. It's standing beside someone when they're scared. It's making 1,000 small choices that add up to a life lived right. Is that what you did? That's what I'm trying to do. Every day. Sometimes I succeed. Sometimes I fail. But I keep trying. She nodded, satisfied with that answer, returned to her crane. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence. The radio played WGN talk of Chicago Cubs spring training city council meetings, a water main break on the south side. The familiar litany of a city breaking and healing and breaking again. But Lily was humming, making plans for her purple crane, already thinking about who might need a reminder that things could get better. And Jake was making pancakes, teaching his daughter through every small choice that doing right mattered more than staying comfortable. Some legacies got written in legislation. Some got built in movements. Some got passed from parent to child in Sunday morning kitchens where burnt pancakes and paper cranes accumulated into lives worth living. All of them mattered. All of them were necessary. All of them were enough. Outside Oak Park woke to Sunday morning. Porch lights going off. Families heading to churches or farmers' markets or lazy mornings with newspapers and coffee. Ordinary people living ordinary lives in extraordinary times, choosing every day whether to look away or stand up, or find some third path that honored both courage and wisdom. Jake Morrison chose to make pancakes, teach his daughter, fix furnaces, live quietly in the space between hero and ordinary, refusing to be defined by either, and every day that choice was enough.